Cool, so proactive. What do we mean by that? Well, it's a little pun. So proactive, according to Wiktionary, means acting in advance to deal with an expected change or difficulty. And a pro is an advanced user who, as we all know, hates any attempt by software to try to be helpful. So when Microsoft is kind enough to offer this help, it's sort of Charlie Brown. What they'll hear is just obnoxiousness, right? So we'll do this talk in two halves. First, we'll talk about how being proactive can actually be helpful, and then we'll talk about pitfalls to avoid this being how it's perceived. So real quick, who's in the room? Who here is a designer? OK, we got a couple people. Who's a developer, a data scientist? OK, it's just like the plurality majority of you guys, maybe. Who writes SQL or has? OK, a lot of folks. That's great. So you got a pretty diverse group. Any lawyers? Here's a lot of lawyers. Oh, cool. So I can defame everybody. Fantastic. Who's got a driver's license? OK, good number of you. Who remembers taking their driver's test? OK, keep your hands up if you think you'd get 100% on the driver's test if you took it today. Oh, very few left, but congratulations. And who uses Google Maps? OK, hands up again. Cool. So yeah, I might give you an introduction. I did small systems at Stanford and then did a bunch of stuff at Apple, most recently on Siri, but all around language and people and computers. And I'm going to use both those bits of prior experience to kind of go deep a little bit today. So back when I was at Stanford, I was in a lab with the late, great Cliff Nass here on the top right. And he was working with this car. Some of you may recognize this is Stanley, the second generation car designed by Sebastian Therman and the team there that's now doing autonomous cars at Google. And Stanley was designed for urban driving. Sebastian's a sort of very future-oriented sort of person who's excited for the singularity and for cars all driving themselves. And so am I. I think that'll save a lot of lives and they'll be faster and better. Cliff's an HCI and communications professor. And so he was trying to figure out, what do we do in the meantime, right, when we still have humans behind the driver's seat? We have all this intelligence and all these great sensors and great AI. How do we kind of have this work with humans? And the dream was this would be an angel on your shoulder, right? It has perfect spatial attention and awareness. And it'll keep you from having an accident. It'll help you optimize your gas mileage, all this stuff, right? Angel on your shoulder. The other option is it could be your mother in the passenger seat all the time, right? Gasping at every stop sign, right? And so how do we kind of get that balance of like backseat driver versus angel? And so we tried a bunch of experiments with basically the when and the how of interventions, right? So you're at the wheel, sensors are going, it can tell if you're driving well or not. It knows the delta between what you're doing and what it would do. How can it then communicate with you? So we had things that were subtle, like a little flashing red light on your window. So we're trying to keep people from cutting people off in traffic, right? So I'm looking over here, and there's someone in my blind spot. I can see a red flashing light. And I'm like, OK, I'll stop, right? It could make a loud honking noise, or a pleasant chime noise. Or it could be a haptic feedback. The steering wheel could vibrate, or my chair could vibrate, right, like some sort of video game. And we did all these experiments, all these different things. And there's different questions of when do you intervene? Do you intervene far enough in advance to minimize damage, but then people feel like, hey, I knew that. Stop, leave me alone, right? So we had different hypotheses. We said maybe when you're signaling, only then should we give feedback, because then you're kind of asking for it, right? Or we said, well, what about the opposite? What about if I'm messing around with the radio or the GPS and I'm drifting to another lane? That's when we buzz, right? So anyway, this got me interested in this whole idea of how do you help people without the attempt to help actually hurting them and making them, worst case, shut you off, and then you get none of the benefits. So let's continue this metaphor. The driving metaphor for this whole talk is going to be driving. How does this driving stuff relate to consuming data? So when you're behind the wheel of a car, everyone remember back in the old days there were paper maps, and hopefully they're in a language you can read. And you use them to figure out how you're going to get where you want to go. Right? You know your goal, how you're going to do it. So you plan your route. You figure out when you're going to leave based on that route. And then as you drive, you're making a ton of decisions every moment, right? How fast to go, what lane to be in, which exit to take, should you have your high beams on, should you signal? And you're trying to be quick and get to the right place and maybe be courteous and compliant enough with the law and not get a ticket, right? And you have to do a lot of decisions at once. So this is just like, I would contend, trying to write a query. Before you start, you kind of need a map. you have to figure out, okay, which table contains the information that I want? And which version of that table is actually the one that's up to date? Some of them are going to be stale, some of them are going to be production, et cetera, right? And then as you're actually doing it, you got to figure out, okay, I've got my base table, what am I going to join with? Using what condition, right? What am I going to filter by? Which way should I calculate this metric, right? Can I take the sum? Do I have to, whatever? Is this familiar? People have had this experience? Should I include Hawaii in the set? Right? Maybe it depends on whether I'm on the finance team or the ops team. May I include gender? Right? Maybe that's not allowed if I'm building a credit score classifier as a data product, but it's required for my analytics to the government or to marketing, something like that. So I think in this first we're going to talk about the promise of proactivity. How can we design an interface? Think about how we do it on the road and how we could do it in the SQL context to help people with the planning and the execution to avoid mistakes and to get where they want to go faster. Okay? And then in the second half, we're going to say, okay, how do we do that in such a way where we don't go overboard and it backfires? So there's different ways to change behavior. Right? What we're trying to do is get people to be better drivers in the kind of crazy highways of their SQL and other data systems. And so one way that the powers that be try to influence people's driving behavior is through the DMV. Right? So for 100 years, the good people of the DMV have been serving California, and during that time, they've written almost 100 pages, actually a little more than 100 pages, of bullet-pointed rules for how to drive in every possible condition. And I think this is sort of a traditional approach, and you can think of it as sort of train, test, trust, right? And we even have customers who do things exactly this way, right? They have a big, long manual. Here's how you query a data warehouse. Never, ever, ever do a right join with the blah table, right? And then they'll give you a multiple choice test. And then at this company, they don't give you your credentials to query the database until you've passed the test. So it's just like the driver's license model, right? It's really amazing. And do you think nobody ever gets anything wrong at this company, right? Because we know some of us who have design background here, the sort of declarative memory that you are kind of cramming into and drawing from when you take the test is not the same that you need in real life when you're making decisions in real time under pressure, right? So thank goodness this is not the only approach that the government uses to get people to drive safely. They also do things like this, right? They have things that are salient and simple and just in time in the context to get your behavior to change right there when you need it, right? And I think, and this is the approach that Elation tries to use of sort of proactive intervention. Now, I'm going to do a quick contrast here. Here are 3 real questions excerpted from the California driver's test. Take a look. Who thinks they could get them all right? 95% confidence. OK, too late, you're dead, right? A truck has just swiped you from the left. So again, thank goodness we have these sort of ways of communicating as well. Instead of just training, testing, and trusting, we'll have these sort of salient signals here with the red, actionable advice, because trucks made wide right turns, don't pass on the right. This is a passenger loading zone, wait no longer than 4 minutes, 59 seconds. I love this one the best, right? Literally, red flashing lights. It's all the things that conceptual psychology tells us will work. But it's affixed to the thing that is relevant, the school bus, right? Does that make sense? So I think if you can do both, the DMV test and the situated intervention, do both. If you have to pick one, I think there's a strong impulse to maybe pick the just-in-time intervention. And in fact, for many of the interfaces that get us to drive correctly, we only use just-in-time intervention, and we wouldn't even dream of doing it otherwise. So here's a quick example. This is actually a newspaper clipping where it shows that for certain stretches of these highways in Maine, the speed limit's raised to 70, and elsewhere it's not, right? Imagine if we took down all the speed limit signs and we just had this, right? You just look at the map and you consult it every time you want to know how fast to be going, right? Probably have more accidents and more infractions, right? Thankfully, we put signs up where they belong, right? And we can even go better. We can say, well, let's not just consider where you are, or where the sign is. Let's consider how fast you're going, give you feedback that's tailored to you based on your behavior. And sometimes these get very actionable and salient too. Let's say, slow down, right? That's something in this? Okay. So what that means in the data space is we can have warnings of different types, in bright red letters right there in the SQL editor. This is an older version of our app, but you can see here in one example that the data is stale, so the answer is not going to be correct, and it's not HIPAA compliant, it's healthcare data, so it's not going to be compliant. And we'll tell you that right as you're writing it. This is kind of like you turn to the mirage of the parking lot, right? And you say, oh shoot, it's accessible space, and then you back out and move on before you get in trouble. Or here it's a performance warning. I just pushed run, and it's like training wheels, right? Before it can get too much trouble, it says, hey, if you run this query, it might, it's in the whole database down. So put on the brakes, right? Now, people are annoyed by this because sometimes we're wrong. Thankfully, there's an ignore button. And when you push that, we can learn from that feedback. And the hope is that the cost of not having this intervention, literally your query should run in 5 minutes, runs for two days, and you get angry emails. We think it's worth it to have this point. But again, the data kind of coaches us on how to tune those variables. Okay, one other example here. This is all about, again, the choice of like DMV, trying to prevent you from driving unsafely, and then street signs and things. Oh, one fun thing actually is we talked about the speed limits. You can even go farther. Imagine if you take all the stoplights and the street signs away, right? So you have unlabeled intersections, and you look in your book, right? And it says, oh, if you arrive at this intersection, which happens to be First Street and Main Street, you can read that. If you're going in the north-south direction, right, you can do that at 15 seconds past the minute or 30 seconds past the minute, right? I think you can go totally absurd with this and see that you're much, much better off putting all of that contextualized than just trying to train and test, right? So that's why it's good to be proactive, to be in someone's face. But you can not only just help people not make mistakes, you can also help them achieve their own goals faster, and that's what GPS is all about, right? You just say where you want to go, and it does the route planning, it tells you when to leave, it does all of that for you. And it reduces the cognitive overload. You just focus on the actual driving part. And it will tell you, when to turn, and otherwise you can relax. And if you're doing that, you have a chance to integrate all sorts of information, right? TomTom makes this choice to show you your own speed limit. So it's one of those, here's how fast you're going constantly, right? And they have your attention because they're helping you drive while they're at it. They can let you drive safely. Right? Same thing here. They can show there's a construction zone, there's traffic, all that information can be put on the interface. Right? So wouldn't it be great to have GPS for your data, right? Instead of just a street map that you have to do all the work yourself. So what would that mean? GPS for your data would mean turn-by-turn directions based on the same things it's based on in the driving world, based on where you are, the context of what you type, what tables you're using, that sort of thing. And where you're going. If I say, hey, computer, take me home, right? In this case, we have semantic search. The user has typed MAL, and that's, could be the beginning of the English word male, which is maybe they want to type in gender code equals 1, or it could be country code is the one for Malta or Malawi or Mali, right? So normally I'd have to go consult my map, right? Maybe it's a wiki or a friend to figure out what's the name of the column, what's the name of the value, and do all that lookup, right? Here, no map required. Just say where you want to go. It'll tell you how to turn to get there, snippet by snippet. Make sense? So, so this is sort of using SQL syntax and social statistics, and semantic search, excuse me, to help filter the list. We can also figure out how to rank order options in that list using social statistics. So what does that mean? Think about Google traffic in maps, right? You're driving, this is in LA, if you're unlucky enough to be there, with an Android phone in your pocket, and 2 hours ago you were moving at 60 miles an hour, and now you're moving at 5 miles an hour, and that phone's relaying it back, and Google aggregates all of that data to get up-to-date traffic information, right? So what it can then do is say, oh, everyone else is going there, you should go here instead to save time. In the case of SQL, usually if there's two versions of the table that look the same, but one hasn't been used for 2 years and one was used by 100 great analysts just this morning, like that's the one to use. So we can do the opposite. We can say, okay, where's the traffic, and have that guide us. So we can filter by SQL syntax, and semantic search, and we can rank by social statistics to put the most likely candidates in that order and really help you out. Right? And this goes beyond critically a normal autocomplete. Right? Normal autocomplete saying you typed a couple letters, what are the next letters you want to type? That would be like saying, what if your self-driving car says, like Clippy, it looks like you're making a left-hand turn. Do you want us to finish it for you? right? Left-hand turns are actually very dangerous, so that could be nice, but like way better if it can say, oh, you're trying to get home? Let me figure out the 100 different turns to get there, and then that minute stuff is a little less important. Cool. So this is what we just talked about. When you're trying to leverage proactivity to make interface better, there's a lot of opportunity and promise there. You can reduce not just the little keystrokes, which is the thing a lot of people think about, or simple wizards. You're writing a letter, can I type from your name for you? Like, not that helpful, right? We can go beyond that and actually reduce the time it takes to do research, the time it takes to do planning, the time it takes to reinvent the wheel. We can take all the time that's wasted because of mistakes you could make along the way. But with little mistakes like slips, they're easy to recover from because you know you made a mistake. But also big mistakes that can cause problems for your whole organization. And they might be very insidious. You might not even notice you made them. And so we can kind of nip that in the bud as well, right? By baking the best practices into the tool and making each analyst as smart as all the analysts combined. Right? And we can prevent cognitive load and context switching. We had a lot of interviews where without this tool, people had literally 100 tabs open, wikis, Yammer, Skype, et cetera, just like, oh wait, which version of this column, et cetera. And that also causes stress and wasted time. So I think this is a big, big opportunity. Cool, makes sense so far? Any questions on? Okay, cool. So now let's let the other shoe drop, right? Clearly, there's a lot of promise. How do we make sure we don't go overboard? What are the perils of being too proactive? We've got the promise. What are the perils? The biggest peril, I think, is having the Clippy disease, right? Attention distracting hyperproactivity disorder, right? Just being in your face. But it can even get worse than that. This is a text message that I've sent a variant of many, many times back in the day. Does this ever happen to any of you? Right? This is the computer trying to be helpful. It says, SEC lowercase is not a word, and you are a human who wants to spell things correctly. I cannot help but notice that the C key is near the X key, maybe. And to save you the work of having to accept the suggestion, I'm just going to do it for you as you push the send button, right? This happened to me and my boss so many times, and thankfully we both worked at Apple on language technology, and so we didn't, nobody reported anybody. But I think an understandable mistake by a computer can cause a big misunderstanding for a human, and so I think the cost of false positives can be quite high. So we're trying to balance these tensions. I think in the previous section, I sort of laid out why you don't want to be too reticent or too timid, right? If you as the computer know what's right with some confidence, then maybe you should speak up. And if there's a way to do something better, don't make it too hard to accept that suggestion. But it's very dangerous to get cocky or get pushy, right? To make it so that the person cannot reject your suggestion even if they know they don't want it, or to think you're right when the confidence threshold really is down there, right? So a few examples. Again, back to iOS, near and dear to me. Here, I'm trying to write a sentence. For whatever reason, we're in the Markov room. It's got a Markov model that thinks that for some reason, A positives. I don't know why it isn't able to get the singular right there, but there it is. And of course, as soon as I push question mark, it's going to accept this suggestion with the question mark at the end. And if I want to recover from that, I have to push delete twice. First delete the question mark, then delete the S. Then I push this button to get back to punctuation, and then I push question mark. So not too bad. How much time did it save me? Well, I was still going to spell it wrong. But anyway, there's these trade-offs here, right? I have really annoying things that happen. There's a place, a building on Stanford that I used to go to a fair bit, and it's called Huang, and it's like capitalized like anything else. It's not an acronym. And somehow my phone just got convinced it's all caps. And every time I type it, I have to delete the whole thing and do it again. It's nuts. So these things frustrate people. Did you have this? Okay, cool. So I think what's interesting here is this is an interface that Apple took back from the phone to the Mac. And on Mac, I love it. Because I'm touch typing on my keyboard. I have the haptic feedback of the shape of the keys so that I can do it without looking, right? And so as I'm typing, my gaze is up here. And if the suggestion is coming up and I don't want it, I push escape. And if I'm a couple letters in and it's a good suggestion, then I push space. And I'm actually saving time, right? But with here, I'm looking down here to type. I have to move both my eyes and my finger up here to reject it, right? It's a little bit too pushy for me some of the time. The case where it's really great is when I'm not typing any proper nouns or SAT words. If I'm just typing the most statistically probable sentences, and look, we're on our phones. A lot of people are typing or tweets and Facebook messages and and text messages where they're just saying the usual stuff. Hi, how are you? I'll be there in 1 sec, right? The usual. So anyway, in that case, you just keep your gaze here, you tap it out, you make tons of mistakes, it's correcting in real time. If it had to stop and say, click here to accept for each one, you wouldn't get that case. So I think there's sort of a flow-based design here. It's like, how do you kind of know how likely you are to be right, and then make a choice about how pushy to be. Does that make sense? OK, cool. So real quick here on the side, by the way, I'll just point out another approach, one that's that's way less pushy and a little more maybe pro-friendly. iOS 6, this is about when I left Apple, they had this great button that I loved, the .com button. And it used context. It would only show up when you're in a browser URL bar or in like an email field in your contacts. And you just push .com and you get those 4 letters for free. There's a pattern that some of you may know, some of you may not. Do you know that you can hold down a letter on the keyboard to get alternatives? So the most common case is you hold down the A to get all the accents for Spanish and French and whatnot. Well, for .com, you could hold it down, and you could get .org, .edu, et cetera. Now, a lot of people didn't discover that, but they didn't have to. Everyone discovered .com, and it was somewhat intuitive. In iOS 7, they kept the options, but to get .com or any of them, even the most frequent one, you have to hold down your finger on the period key, which nobody would think to do. Why would you hold down on a single key to get a multi-key? So it was really smart to have .com just right there on the surface because people can kind of figure out the concept because it's leveraging this convention without having to really try. So I think we see sort of different extremes here. The extreme of saying you have to actively reject our suggestion is one extreme. Having a thing that you have to actually read a book to know how to do it is the other extreme, right? And you have to hold long press. Like, how much time is that saving you, right? And then there might be a happy sweet spot where you can kind of put a suggestion that you have to accept actively, but make it so easy to accept that it actually can save you time. Now again, we're talking about shaving off 4 characters. This is not curing cancer, but I do think it's a really nice design over here on the side. So let's talk about query tools. That's why I think some of us are here. Here's SQL Pro. Who uses SQL Pro? Oh, nobody. Oh, really? Oh, people query MySQL at all? This is a really nice, in many ways, desktop client for MySQL, so I recommend it. But its suggestions, I don't think, are so hot. And it's a free tool, so good for them. But they suggest nothing in this context. Select star space. Right? So if Mr. Markov here would tell you that if you look at SQL that runs successfully in the logs, which is what we do, literally there is only one thing that can occur here, and it's from. Right? Probability 1. But we get no suggestions. So if I'm a SQL novice, I'm like, oh, what is it? Is it select star out of, select star in table? Okay, I'm stuck. If I type S, I get an alphabetical list of all possible keywords. So select star false, select star fast. It's like, all right, that's how I want to do it, right? And I can scroll down past the bottom and select from if I want. So this is a straw man. There are other contexts that are much more ambiguous, and there are certain keywords or maybe a long table or schema name you have that are so long that this will really save you a lot of time. Maybe something that's hard to spell. There's definite value to the system, and it's kind of the industry standard. But this particular moment, not pretty, right? If I'm not a pro, I don't know to write from at all. Computing from F isn't very helpful. And if I am a pro, I can type the remainder much faster than I can go down through the list. Right? So it would be really great if they could leverage context and do smarter ranking based on it. Right? Now I'm going to do a tool that's really good autosuggest. This is Sublime. Who uses Sublime? Okay, a few. Great. Sublime is really great. So again, after x equals, I got nothing. There's context here that doesn't matter. But as soon as I begin typing, it finds matches. It doesn't just rank them alphabetically. It does some smart things based on the particular letters I've typed and the probability I'm going to use them. It's a fuzzy match. So if I'm a novice who's made a mistake, like a misspelling, it will still match things that are close. Like maybe I accidentally skipped the A. Somehow it thinks it's there, but or I accidentally missed the P, and I want to type this instead. Right? So it's very forgiving. And once you see this forgiving fuzzy match, and you look at the way it's highlighting, you realize, oh, I could type in RRLMN, right? It kind of rewards acronyms and things like that, right? So a pro user can quickly figure out that you can use this to save a lot of time, right? So again, it's discoverable, and it's recoverable, right? It's kind of that nice Nice medium. So one thing both these tools do that made us believe it wasn't even up for debate is as soon as this box appears, the top item is highlighted. And it really makes sense in Sublime's case, because if you're doing all this work to find the most probable thing and put it on top, make it really easy to get it onto your page. Okay, and again, there's nothing after you accept a suggestion after white space, after punctuation. It only happens after a letter. So I'll get back to that in a minute. So Elation said, let's not wait for a letter, right? Because the place where you can make the biggest impact is not saving keystrokes. It's saving the research and the planning and looking at the map, right? So after on, if I know what I want to type, I can just type it, whether I'm a learner or a pro. What's great is if I forget what's the right condition to join this on, this is the moment where you can make a big difference, save them a lot of keystrokes and a lot of wiki pages. But by default, we had it highlight from the very beginning, like the other tools do. This did not go so well in user testing with pros. Learners are fine. They're going slow. They're looking up. They're thinking very carefully what's going to happen when they push each key, and they loved it. Saved them a ton of time. But the pros, they use the two keys that are the universal keys for accepting suggestions, right? Return and tab, to do things like this, return tab, right? And when you have a suggestion coming up when they weren't expecting it, after white space instead of after an ASCII character, or an alphabetic character, they would get these insertions they don't want. And it's very hard to recover. Now you've got to like hit delete a bunch of times, even, God forbid, move your hands all the way to your mouse. The thing pros hate the most to like make up for our trying to be so helpful, right? So, so the new plan is, OK, let's not highlight this by default. If you really want it, you can push down arrow, enter. Right? So you have it if you want it, two keystrokes away if you want it, but not going to be inserted accidentally. But of course, even down arrow, some pros are like, I use the arrow keys all the time to move my cursor. And I use other things too. I use all the Vim commands to like just bounce around like nobody's business, right? So we can allow that too, right? Because the interesting thing is when you stop focusing on saving keystrokes and focus on saving cognitive overhead and research time, you realize, is the hard part typing the letter C? Or is the hard part that knowing that C is the letter to type because this is the string you want to insert? Right? So even if we make it so that arrow keys don't work, we just show you what's available, and you can select the one on top. But this is just grayed out because it's proprietary. But the idea is that the top hit's the one that you'll be inserting. You can just read the other options here, type letter of the first one till you've disambiguated, and then hit enter, and keep the arrow keys reserved too, right? So I think one of the things you can do to work for pros is to realize, well, what is it trying to help them do? Maybe the biggest savings aren't in the execution phase, it's in the planning phase. Cool. Hopefully that makes some sense. Another quick example of this where we tried to be really helpful and then realized we had to maybe tone it back to avoid being Clippy. This, unfortunately, is an old version of the code base I don't have access to right now, but I can show you the equivalent from iOS. Another thing I worked on back when I was there before Siri was what eventually became the little like 3-word options you have statistically. So once, upon, I type upon, I hit time, right? I'm doing the most probable words in a row, and it's just one tap each time. And it's being so helpful, it's inserting the space for me. So it's halved the number of taps I need to do so far. And again, these are taps, not just keyboard strokes, so it's even more useful. Once upon a time, there, it needs a couple letters for that, was, N, amazing. And again, statistics get you a long way. You get the grammar for free, right? Princess. But now it inserted a space that I don't want. Now, there are way more spaces in other punctuation, unless you're comma crazy like me. I mean, even then, right? So it wasn't so bad that I went through my life every several acceptings having to do one delete to then get my cursor where I want it to be for punctuation. But how many of you know what would happen if I didn't push delete, if I just go over to punctuation and hit a punctuation character? All right, take this with you into your lives. You'll be so happy you did. You can just hit exclamation point, and it will insert it behind the cursor in the space. Right? Nobody knew, right? This is the most, it's the coolest undiscoverable feature in this. And we try to do the same thing. We're like, trust us. We know SQL, right? After select, we are going to suggest the most probable column or function in order. So you can literally just type return, it gets select, return, most popular column, return, it would insert a comma and the next most popular column. And you just keep going, maybe with arrow keys in the middle, and it would just like write you the best query, right? And all you have to do is slam on the enter key. People hated it, because they're good at typing commas. They're SQL analysts. And they'd end up with 2 commas or no commas, they push delete. We're trying to save them a couple microseconds, and we're getting all this cognitive load. What we wind up doing is taking a page out of Don Norman's book. And again, I know this is more of a developer crowd than a designer crowd, so I'll just say he has these ideas of the gulf of execution, how hard it is to figure out how to do something, and the gulf of evaluation, how hard it is to figure out what state the system is in. And what that means for us is, if you go back to here, when I push enter or tab, if it's set up the way, and this is highlighted, what will happen every time is it will insert exactly this string exactly at the cursor. Right? Back when half the time it would do that, and half the time it would insert a comma before the cursor with the space and then the thing, right? People didn't know what to expect, and the unpredictability drove them nuts. Right? And so it's better to say what you see is what you get always. And yeah, it takes some more commas and spaces, in this very highly regulated environment, but it means that you always know what's going to happen, and so you don't have this nervousness about the system, and you can actually leverage the goods that are there. Does that make sense? So these are just a couple little design journeys we went on with this particular interface, which is one of the proactive interfaces for one of the apps in Elation. So I'll leave all of this for the question section, but hopefully it gives you some sense of how you can make a proactive query tool and some of the roadblocks you can avoid when you try to get too clever. So to summarize this section, our goal is to reduce the risks of backtracking, loss of trust, confusion, frustration, distraction. Some of it's emotional, but some of it is quite practical. And to do that, you need to not be too clever, not be too pushy. Right? Figure out what are the things you can be really confident of and deliver those and not mess people up. You don't want to miss the forest for the trees, right? It's so easy as a UX guy to count keystrokes, especially if you're a data UX guy, right? You're like, oh, I want numbers. And forget to consider the broad. I mean, if you're going to count anything, right, count seconds. That's the atomic unit, right? Not keystrokes. But what about cognitive load, cost of recovery? Those things can often add up to way more than the time it takes to type a space or a comma. And the other thing you want to avoid is try not to sacrifice global consistency to hyper-optimize for one local instance. And if you're going to do that, make sure you've got a good reason and your user tests it, and make sure your user tests are always global. Right? Because if you test, let's test how fast users can fill in the columns and functions between select and from in the column list, and then over here we test how quickly can they add a join, and over here we test how quickly can they add a filter, and you never do a holistic say, hey, just get your work done in our tool. You don't realize that the cognitive overload of figuring out how is it going to behave in this case actually outweighs the benefits of that optimization, and they can optimize in their heads better than you can predict what they're going to be doing. So putting it together, we're going to talk about what is the paradox that the pro presents to us. They're super experienced. They're better at planning. They might not even have to plan. Right? Think about before Uber when you had like the SF cabbie who knew the one-way streets by heart. Right? So not as helpful to give him GPS, right, as maybe it is today. Less prone to error. Right? So these people, they're already operating at 90% capacity. To get them that last 10%, in some ways you've got to hyper-optimize. Right? Make it so that it's really quick. If I have to move my mouse to the top of the screen and hit accept suggestion now, I'm not going to bother doing it. I'd be faster just doing it myself. But they're so sure of themselves and so skeptical of technology that if you make a mistake, especially if you push the mistake on them and don't make it easy for them to reject it, then they're even more frustrated and there's less opportunity to delight them. So I think the goal is to try to consider, let's really look at the flows we have. Can we minimize these two things at once? Their intention. Can we minimize the time it takes to accept a suggestion if you want it, but also minimize the probability of accidental selection if you don't? Definitely intention, very easy to accidentally do one or the other, but as we saw with like the .com example, with this idea of saying, only highlight after keystroke, but show suggestions after whitespace, there are opportunities if you're thoughtful to get both at once. So that is what I've got today. Elation.com if you want to learn more about what we do. If you're interested in joining our team and thinking about really tricky design and data problems, you can also go to elation.com/careers. And I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. Thanks.
Any possibility of open sourcing this anytime soon?
The question was any possibility of open sourcing Compose. So not soon. This is technology that our customers really like, and we really like to get revenue from that. But I think there's a couple things that are interesting. I think one is we're looking at having this technology be out kind of in the wild, having like a university program, a research program, so people can use it who might not be able to pay for a license is one opportunity. And I think who knows what the future will hold. Maybe parts of what we do might be part of our project and parts will be proprietary. Any other questions? While we're waiting, here's some best of Clippy. As I was looking for the two images we ended up using, there's some really creative people out there. Any other questions about proactivity? OK, thanks so much. Oh. Oh, I should tell one silly story? Oh my gosh. Oh, Mike, sorry. I'll think about it. I'll get back to you.
I have a question. Like, when you guys sell this to customers, like, how do you present the ROI? Like, is it like a versus a regular, free simulator?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thankfully now we're mature enough that we actually have customers who will stand up and say ROI with numbers. Can I share the Safeway anecdote, for example? Yeah, so Safeway is one of our customers. And there's a woman who leads this analytics team. And so I'll cut to the punchline. She said they got a 30x ROI on the cost of the software. And it isn't just from the query tool, right? So the query tool is helping you write a query better, leveraging snippets. We also have this idea of a query library. So before you even start to write a query in the first place, you can see, oh, has somebody already written this, or a variant that I could templatize and revise slightly. So I think what's interesting is that the more you zoom out, to ask not just how do I get through the next few characters, but like can I cut out major days, weeks long parts of my process, implication of effort. That's where some of those big wins come from. The other thing is when you get the right answer fast, right? You aren't only getting ROI from saving the individual end user analyst time. You get ROI from making better decisions as a business and avoiding incorrect decisions, or avoiding. There's a sad thing when people want to be data driven, but the VP looks at two metrics. They're supposed to be the same, and one is 3x the other, and says, oh, forget it. I'm just going to go with my gut, right? So I think there's some of these that are very easy to quantify and some that are more intangible, but it adds up to quite a big benefit. And I think we have customers who are willing to do that for us.
Yeah, and actually, Aaron, unknown to you, before lunch in this room we had Hernan and Robin from Salesforce speaking, and they gave quite a plug to Elation. They're using you for automating cataloging their data sets.
Awesome. Yeah, we were very happy that they were able to speak here. Cool. Okay, what's a funny story? Oh, I have one. So yeah, I'm a huge geek, NLP guy by background, and have been playing catch up a little bit with learning the enterprise data space. So I went to a customer call with an Elation executive who asked, as far as I could tell, apropos of nothing, this head of analytics, how many of your analysts have BO, which is another way of abbreviating BobJ, which is business objects. But I was just appalled. I'm like, you can't ask that. And of course, joke was on me. So it was a funny story with 1 minute on the clock. OK, I'll be here if you have any questions. Thanks so much.